Jury that convicted James McCamey of murder will now decide if he should be sent to death row for the crime.
The jury found McCamey guilty last week of killing retired teacher Carol Greer in her home in Whiteville. WECT's Sydney Hoover went to court for the start of that hearing today. Now, Sydney, you said earlier it turned out to be a pretty emotional day in the courtroom. McCamey's family actually pleaded trying to save his life.
Yeah, John, 3 of his sisters were called by the defense today to speak before the jury in Columbus County. Those sisters described how they grew up with an abusive stepfather for many years of their childhood. They also said McCamey suffered a head trauma in a car accident when he was young and said he struggled with drug use. His sisters asked the jury to sentence McCamey to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Tomorrow, that court will reconvene to hear testimony from witnesses called by the district attorney's office. Jurors will then deliberate whether to sentence McCamey to death. Now, like a conviction, state law requires a jury to reach a unanimous agreement in order to sentence someone to the death penalty. If that doesn't happen, McCamey will stay in prison for the rest of his life. And that hearing will get started again tomorrow morning at 9:15. We will keep you updated on air and online as the story continues to develop. Sydney Hoover, WECT News.
A gang member who murdered one of his rivals will spend more than 20 years in prison. Daquan Mullins pleaded guilty to murder for the death of Daquan Jacobs on Mother's Day back in 2020. Prosecutors say Mullins fired shots while riding in a car. One bullet hit Jacobs, and his car then crashed into a tree on Oleander Drive. The person driving the car Mullins rode in, Montacia Sutton, is set to go on trial in April. Another passenger in that car, Tyquan Millette, is in prison after pleading guilty to accessory after the fact to first-degree murder.